The rain didn't ask who you were. When it started falling, it just fell. They didn't ask who she had been. They just saw the wrinkles, the cane, the silence, and assumed. We were standing in the driveway of the mountain retreat when I first heard them say it. "Don't bring her," one of the organizers muttered under his breath, assuming I couldn't hear him. "She'll slow us down." I turned slowly, catching the pitying glance of a man half my age, but twice as arrogant. He was young, yes. Fit, even. But I'd seen his kind break before. I'd seen people like him scream at shadows they didn't believe in the day before. "She's my mother," I said evenly, my fingers tightening around her soft, weathered hand. "And she's coming." That was the first time I stood up to them. It wouldn't be the last. The invitation came as a surprise. A mysterious letter, gilded at the corners, unmarked but clearly intentional, arrived at my door in late spring. Inside, a single sentence. "Bring your past. We're rewriting the story." And an address. I wasn't sure what it meant, but she did. My mother, once an acclaimed war correspondent, had spent the last decade wrapped in silence. Not because she wanted to, because they decided she'd had enough. Early onset Alzheimer's had taken her words, but not her memories. Not completely. I saw it in her eyes, flickering like old film reels. Her body was slower now, but her spirit, her spirit was still fire. She folded the letter with care, kissed it, and whispered, "This one matters." And so we packed. While others booked standard rooms, budget motels, bunk beds, even I booked the presidential suite. I booked it for her. Because she deserved to wake up with sunrise flooding the windows, not in a cramped corner of the past they tried to bury her in. They said I was being dramatic, that she wouldn't even know the difference. They didn't see her that night, when she walked barefoot to the balcony and stared into the city lights like she recognized every blinking window. She was the one who led us out of that siege in Kabul, an older man told me later, after a few too many drinks. We were green, scared kids. She had a camera and a notepad. That was it. But she told us where to hide, how to breathe, what not to say on the radio. She saved 6 of us. I looked at him, stunned. Why didn't anyone say anything? He chuckled bitterly. Because she made them uncomfortable. No one likes a woman who knows more, speaks louder, and runs faster. But the world did what it does best: it forgot. Until now. The retreat wasn't just a meeting. It was a trial, a proving ground. People came to speak their truths, to air their ghosts, and let go of the stories that had weighed them down for years. Some came to confess, others to run. I came to remind. I walked her through the grand doors of the suite that first evening. Gold-rimmed ceilings, soft velvet chairs, a chandelier that pulsed with warm light. She walked to the window, touched the glass, and whispered, "It's good to see the sky again." And then she looked at me, clear as the morning she taught me how to ride a bike, and said, "Tell them I'm ready." I wept that night, quietly, into the thick duvet, while she slept. Because I'd waited 10 years to hear that voice again. The next day was introductions. And judgment. The young ones went first. Everyone dressed in black or beige, sipping herbal teas, eyes scanning the room like predators. "I'm here to share my truth," said a man in his 40s. "I lost everything in the market crash. It turned me inside out. I survived a cult," another woman said, tears streaking down her face. "They branded me." The stories were real, raw. But when I stood up, with my mother beside me, a silence dropped heavy across the room. "She doesn't speak," someone said, confused. "No," I said, "but she listens. And that's more than most of you have done in your entire lives." A murmur swept through the circle. My mother lifted her chin. She was there when bombs dropped on the press convoy in Fallujah. She pulled 3 men from burning cars. She lost her hearing in one ear saving a child from sniper fire. She spent 5 years documenting war crimes while you were all watching cable. I looked around. She remembers. In ways you never will. They stared. Someone laughed uncomfortably. "And what do you want us to do with that?" I took a deep breath. "Nothing. Just listen." She raised her hand slowly, shakily, and reached for the notebook I kept in my coat pocket. The one she used to write small thoughts in. Her handwriting now, scrawled and fractured, took up half a page for 2 lines. I held it up for them to see. "You think I'm here to remember? I came so you wouldn't forget." The room went silent. Even the wind seemed to still outside the glass. The next few days changed everything. I'd never seen people so thoroughly disarmed. They asked her questions, soft at first, cautious. then real ones. About fear, about love, about betrayal and the cost of truth. She couldn't always answer clearly. But sometimes, when she touched her heart, when she smiled at a photo or nodded to a song playing in the distance, it was like entire histories came alive. And she wasn't alone anymore. That was the beginning. That was the crack in the wall. That was the moment people remembered she wasn't a burden. She was a torch, and we were the ones too afraid to carry it. That night, I found her seated at the writing desk in the suite, pen hovering just above paper, as if waiting for the right memory to land. The chandelier's soft flicker cast a golden glow over her silver hair. She looked like a queen caught in reverie somewhere between past and present, grief and defiance. I sat down across from her, careful not to interrupt. "Do you want me to help you write something?" I asked gently. She shook her head. Then, slowly, she scribbled two names, Elena and Fayez. I paused. They were. She nodded once. I remembered her stories from childhood, half fairy tales, half nightmares. Elena had been her translator during the Balkan conflict. Fayez, a photojournalist from Syria who'd once taken a bullet for her when a riot turned violent. "They're not in the history books," she murmured, voice cracking through the fog. "But they saved more lives than the generals did." She stared at the names for a long time before circling them twice. "We don't get to choose who history remembers," she said. "But we can remember each other." That night, I printed their photos. I placed them on the table beside her notebook. And we sat like that, for hours, just honoring what the world had forgotten. By day 4, everything shifted. It started with a man named Jacob, a decorated CEO, mid-50s, always in a suit too tight for comfort, always with something clever to say. He'd been vocal in the first days, scoffing at emotional theatrics, dismissing those who cried too easily or shared too much. But after watching my mother for 3 days, quiet, thoughtful, defiant, something broke. "I was 12 when I watched my sister drown," he said that morning, voice trembling. I didn't move. I froze. I told myself I couldn't swim fast enough to help. But the truth is I was scared. The room held its breath. He looked at my mother. "You wouldn't have been." She said nothing, just reached for her pen and scribbled one line. "Fear is human, but silence is a choice." He nodded, tears running freely now. "Then I choose not to be silent anymore." From that moment on, the retreat was no longer about who could tell the most tragic story or sound the most enlightened. It became something else entirely, something purer. It became about truth. Each night, our suite filled with visitors. Not officially, not by design, but somehow, word got out that room 801 was where you went when you wanted to feel human again. A woman named Clarissa came first, a nurse from New Jersey who'd worked the COVID wards during the first brutal waves. She brought a bottle of wine and a photo of her brother who hadn't made it. Then came Dev, a former UN peacekeeper who'd lost both legs in a roadside bombing. He brought his journal, the one he hadn't shown anyone in 10 years, and asked if my mother would read a page. She did, twice, then underlined a single sentence. "You still exist beyond what was taken." By the end of the week, our room was a sanctuary. Not because of me, because of her. They said she would slow us down, but she became our compass. Each morning, she'd sit by the window, tea in one hand, notebook in the other, and wait. Without fail, someone would knock. And she would listen. That was her power. Not her words, not her past, but her presence. She listened like time stopped for her, like nothing was more important than your trembling voice. And when she touched your hand, it felt like forgiveness. By day 6, the retreat felt like something out of another world. The facilitators no longer directed us. People gathered in spontaneous circles. Some read poetry. Others played music. There were tears, sure, but there was laughter, too. And healing. The kind that doesn't come from talking. The kind that only comes when someone looks at your worst parts and says, "I see you. And I'm still here." And still, there were whispers. "She's amazing," someone said. "But isn't it sad she doesn't have her full mind anymore?" I turned slowly to face them. "You don't need a perfect memory to carry wisdom," I said. "She's forgotten less about being human than most of you ever learned." They fell quiet. On the final night, they asked for a speaker. One voice to close the retreat. People nominated Jacob, Clarissa, even one of the facilitators. But all eyes slowly turned toward us. "She started this," someone said. "Let her finish it." I looked at my mother. Her eyes sparkled, fierce and lucid. She stood slowly, using my arm to steady herself. Then walked, not shuffled, walked to the front of the grand hall. A sea of faces turned toward her. Many had cried on her shoulder. Others had confessed secrets they hadn't told their spouses. Some had laughed with her over stories from war zones and wedding cakes. She didn't need a microphone. She didn't need to shout. She simply lifted her notebook and read. You feared I'd be slow. But the slowest thing in this room was your compassion. A ripple ran through the crowd. She continued, her voice steady. I didn't come here to be saved. I came to remind you that you are still worth saving. All of you. Even the liars. Even the ones who ran. Even the ones who stayed too long in silence. Tears streamed freely now. She looked up and smiled. Remember me not for what I forgot, but for what I still remember. That we belong to each other. And we always will. The room exploded into applause. But she simply bowed her head, turned, and walked back to me. I had never been prouder. Not when she won her Pulitzer. Not when she survived 5 war zones. Not even when she whispered my name again after 3 years of not speaking. This was her victory. Her return. Her reminder. That night, in the suite, I packed our bags. But she sat quietly on the balcony, watching the moon. I stepped out to join her, the air cool and laced with eucalyptus. Do you regret anything? I asked. She nodded, slowly. I regret letting them silence me. I swallowed. They never really did. She smiled, eyes soft. No, but I let them think they had. I placed my hand on hers. Not anymore. She exhaled. You booked the presidential suite, she said with a chuckle. Why? I looked at her. Because I wanted the world to see you shine in gold again. She leaned her head against mine. I didn't need gold. I know, I whispered. But you deserved it. We left the retreat with no fanfare. No grand farewell. Just 2 women, bags in hand, stepping into a car as morning broke over the hills. But I knew the ripples had started. I saw it in the eyes of the people we passed. I heard it in their thank yous. I felt it in the hugs that lasted a second too long. She changed them. They said she'd slow us down. But in the end, she made time stop just long enough for us to remember who we were before we started running. The following weeks moved like fog, thick, slow, and haunting. Back home, we didn't return to normal. How could we? Something fundamental had shifted, not just in her and me. The retreat had cracked something open. A silence that had settled over our lives for years was finally breaking. Not in loud declarations or sudden revelations, but in little things. She started waking before me. She would sit at the kitchen table, scribbling in her notebook. Sometimes it was just lines, disconnected thoughts. Other times, full paragraphs from the life she once lived and feared forgotten. I bought her a stack of fresh journals. She filled 3 in 2 weeks. We played Nina Simone in the evenings, and I watched her lips move with the lyrics slow, uncertain, but familiar, like the soul of her was singing even when her memory flickered. She had always been brilliant, but now she was free. One afternoon, I found her rummaging through a cardboard box in the attic. Dust flew in golden slants of light, catching in her white hair. She was pulling out old photos, letters, cassette tapes. All her years on the road. 1,000 lives inside 100 envelopes. Help me, she said. With what? With telling the truth. We laid everything on the floor, a mosaic of memories. Pictures of children in rubble, soldiers laughing beneath smoke-streaked skies, women dancing in refugee camps with henna on their fingertips. She pointed to one photo, a little girl in a torn dress, offering my mother a necklace made from newspaper beads. She gave me everything she had, my mother whispered. That day I'd been crying in the truck. I thought I'd failed the story. And then she came. No words. Just grace. We pinned that photo on the wall. And it began, the Remembering Project. We turned the living room into a workshop. I reached out to her old network editors, survivors, photographers, soldiers, doctors, teachers, people who'd once shared danger or secrets or small impossible kindnesses in impossible places. Many didn't answer, but some did. A few even visited. An old French reporter named Luc came from Marseille. He had a limp and a laugh like gravel. You carried us, he told her, voice cracking. When we were too stupid to be afraid and too proud to ask for help, you showed us how to survive. She pressed her hand over his heart. And you brought me home. They wept together. No shame in it. No apology. Weeks became months. The walls filled with stories. Photographs, maps, letters, tape transcripts, all annotated in her trembling script. Her mind came and went. Yes, but her purpose stayed rooted. I began filming her. Not in a documentary sort of way. Not staged. Just moments. Her peeling an orange while reciting a memory from Kosovo. Her staring at a foggy window whispering, "This is what Sarajevo smelled like before the shelling." Her laughing, really laughing as she misquoted Camus and made up her own endings. I uploaded clips to a small blog called Still Here. It exploded. Within days, the blog was shared thousands of times. Journalists reached out. Young activists, trauma therapists, teachers, war veterans. They sent messages like, "I thought my grandmother was lost. I watched this with her, and she started to speak again. Please tell her thank you. She reminded me of my mother, who told me stories of Kabul before it burned. Her hands look like my aunt's. And now I want to ask my aunt what she never said." Some begged for interviews. Others sent poems. A few simply said, "I see her." And that was enough. She smiled one day, watching the comment section. "I used to write to change the world," she said softly. "Now I write to remember it." "You're still changing it," I said. She nodded. "But now I know the real stories aren't in headlines. They're in the way we touch each other." I held her hand. "You've always known that." "Yes," she smiled. But I forgot I was allowed to keep saying it. One morning, I woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that pressed against the walls like an approaching storm. I found her in bed, eyes open, but far away. Her fingers gripped the covers tightly. "Mom." I sat beside her. "Are you with me?" She blinked. Once. Twice. And then she whispered, "Where did the light go?" I held her hand to my chest. "It's here. With me." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She was slipping again. These moments came and went. Sometimes they lasted an hour. Sometimes days. But this one was different. Deeper. I called her doctor. Adjustments were made. Support was offered. And still, she drifted. I turned off the blog for a week. I stayed by her side, reading the letters she once wrote from places no one remembers anymore. "Tell them," she whispered once, half asleep. "Tell them the war isn't the loudest thing. It's the silence that follows." She was talking about more than bombs. She was talking about forgetting. I understood. She came back to us on a Wednesday morning. Eyes clear. Voice strong. "I want to do one more thing," she said, sitting upright, breath labored but gaze sharp. "Anything," I said. "What?" "I want to go back. Just once. Back. To where it all started. The places they made me bury." My heart raced. "You want to travel?" She nodded. "I want to finish the map." I looked over at the wall, the huge, pinned collage that now covered half our home. A map of stories, with red string connecting memories to places. Most of them crossed out, but a few still left unvisited. Unnamed. "You think we can make it?" I asked. She took my hand and smiled. I booked the suite. We flew out the next week. First stop, Berlin. Not for war, but for memory. In an old cafe tucked into Kreuzberg, she found a waitress who had once smuggled passports through coffee deliveries. "Your cappuccino saved 3 lives," my mother told her. The woman broke into tears. Next, Sarajevo. She walked slowly through a rebuilt street where her cameraman once died. She lit a candle, sat on a bench, whispered something I didn't catch. Then Aleppo. This time, we couldn't go in. Too dangerous. But she wrote a letter to the child who had once wrapped a scarf around her bloody wrist. We sent it through a contact. 3 weeks later, the child, now a grown woman, replied. "I still wear the scarf," she wrote. "It smells like smoke. But it saved you." So it became sacred. My mother wept for hours. The final stop, Marseille. Luke met us there again. We rented a room overlooking the harbor. The breeze carried salt and memory. They sat for hours on the balcony, 2 ghosts unburdening each other. That night, she gave him her notebooks. "All of them?" I asked, stunned. She nodded. "He'll keep them safe." Luke placed them in a weathered leather bag, kissed her forehead, and said, "You made the darkness make sense." On the plane home, she slept the whole way. Her hand in mine, her breathing slow. Not weak, peaceful. We landed under soft gray skies. A different kind of homecoming. We returned home in early autumn. The air was different, sharper, as if the world itself was preparing for something it didn't want to say out loud. I unpacked our bag slowly, carefully folding the scarves, the old letters, the The one cracked photo frame she insisted on carrying with her in her purse. She watched me from the armchair, legs curled beneath her like a child, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes followed every movement. But she said nothing. She didn't have to. Everything had already been said. The next few days moved gently, like time was softening its edges just for her. She spent hours at the window, eyes on the turning leaves. She would hum sometimes off-key and scattered little pieces of songs I hadn't heard in years. Jazz, protest ballads, wartime lullabies from places I'd never seen. One afternoon, as I read by her side, she reached over and placed something in my hand. A key. It was old, brass, a little worn. I turned it over. What is this? She looked at me, full of meaning. The drawer. I blinked. What drawer? She nodded toward her bedroom. There, tucked beneath her dresser, behind an old suitcase, was a wooden chest I had never seen before. I fit the key into the lock and opened it. Inside were 5 envelopes, each labeled in her shaky handwriting. For the truth. For forgiveness. For her. For me. For you. My breath caught. I brought them out, laid them before her like sacred artifacts. She tapped the last one. Later, she said softly. I nodded. She started slipping again after that. Longer stretches of silence. Sentences unfinished. Eyes searching the room as if something important had been misplaced. But she didn't seem afraid. Not like before. It was like she was ready. Not to leave, but to return. To the parts of herself that had been waiting in the shadows all these years. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, she turned to me and said, "Promise me something. Anything. When they write about me, don't let them make it sweet." I stared at her. Sweet. They always do, she said. For women. They sand down our edges. They call us resilient instead of furious. Graceful instead of brave. I don't want to be remembered for surviving gently. I leaned forward, forehead against hers. I'll tell the whole truth. She closed her eyes. Then tell them this: I didn't just survive war zones. I survived being erased. She passed away 3 weeks later. In her sleep. A notebook still in her lap. The last line written, barely legible, was, "We are not the silence that follows the gunfire. We are the breath that dares to come after." I read it again, and again, until the ache in my chest became something else. Not grief. Not yet. Something deeper. Like awe. The funeral was small. She wanted it that way. But the response, my God, the world responded. Journalists from 4 continents wrote tributes. Old photographs emerged, ones I'd never seen. My mother crouching next to villagers, marching with nurses, holding hands with children in places I couldn't name. But the most powerful came from strangers. People she had never met, who had only seen her on the blog or read her words secondhand. A woman from Lebanon wrote, "She made me feel like my mother was still alive." A teenager from Kansas said, "She taught me it's okay to remember what hurts." An elder from Rwanda, "I lost everyone. But after hearing her voice, I remembered I'm still here." She had bridged time, war, distance, loss. She had spoken to the parts of us that never made it into books. I finally opened the last envelope a month after she died. The one marked, "For you." Inside, just a letter. "My girl, you carried me when the world wouldn't. You reminded me who I was when the mirror refused to. You gave me a second life, not by fixing me, but by seeing me. I spent years believing my worth was tied to what I could remember, or accomplish, or report. But you taught me that presence is more powerful than legacy, and that sometimes just being here, truly here, is enough. I worried I would slow you down, but I see now. I gave you your own pace. Don't let them rush you. Don't let them shrink you. Don't let them tell you who to carry and who to leave behind. Book the suite. Every time. With all that I am. Your mother. Still. I wept. Then I laughed. Then I read it again. I published a book the next year. She booked the suite. A Daughter Remembers. It wasn't just about her. It was about us. And about everyone like us, the caretakers, the daughters, the forgotten women who once burned with so much light they were asked to dim themselves just to be let in the room. It sold modestly. But it reached people. People who wrote letters. People who called their mothers again. People who went to visit the care home they had been avoiding. People who asked questions, real ones, before it was too late. That was her final story. Not the war zones. Not the awards. Not even the retreat. But the reminder that love doesn't expire with memory. That dignity isn't reserved for the young. That sometimes the slowest person in the room is the one who sees it most clearly. Years later, I still keep her chair by the window. I sit in it sometimes when I write. I watch the light shift across the walls. I hear her voice in the wind sometimes, soft but firm. Tell them we were here. And I do. Every time. Because they said she'd slow us down. But she carried us further than we ever could have gone alone. And that was the truth they weren't ready for. It had been 3 years since the retreat ended. 3 years since Clarissa knocked on the door of room 801 with trembling hands and a bottle of cheap red wine she wasn't even sure they'd like. Back then, she didn't know what she was doing, just that she couldn't keep going. And somehow, that room had become the softest place in the world. And now, she was returning. Not for therapy, not for closure, but because someone needed to hear the truth, and Clarissa finally had the voice to give it. The train to Vermont cut through late autumn woods like a silver needle through gold and fire. Clarissa watched the trees blur past, her fingers tapping lightly on the inside of her coat pocket, where she kept the letter. She hadn't planned on responding to the request. When the email came from the new retreat organizers, would you consider speaking at this year's closeout circle? Her first instinct had been to delete it. Who was she to stand where the old woman had once spoken? But the silence that followed inside her was unmistakable. It wasn't fear. It was permission. She arrived at the lodge just after dusk. Everything was the same: the curved stone path leading to the main building, the faint scent of cedar and clove in the lobby, the crackling fireplace where awkward strangers pretended to be relaxed. Except this time, she wasn't the lost one. This time, she was watching others crumble. Others who'd shown up with pain pressed into their bones like frost. She saw it in their eyes: the micro-hesitations, the compulsive phone checking, the way they stood a little apart from each other even when smiling. She'd been all of that once. The staff had placed her in room 703 with a view of the mountains, they promised. But after dinner, Clarissa found herself slowly walking up one floor, fingers grazing the railings, stopping in front of a very particular door. Room 801. It was empty now. Had been for months, maybe years. No one was assigned to it anymore. Out of respect, someone had said. But Clarissa could feel something inside. Not ghosts. Not memories. Wait. She placed a hand gently against the wood, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she turned and walked away. The next morning, she stood before 30 retreat attendees in the final circle. No script, no binder, just her voice and the letter in her pocket. "I'm not here to inspire you," she said simply. "I'm here to remember someone who made it possible for me to still be standing." She glanced at the facilitators. They nodded for her to continue. Clarissa breathed deep. She didn't speak much, but when she listened, it was like the world got quiet just for you. A pause. "I met her in room 801 3 years ago. I came in with a bottle of wine and a backpack full of guilt. I'd been a nurse during the pandemic. One of the early ones. You know, the heroes. Except I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a graveyard with legs. People shifted in their seats. I'd watched a boy die alone on FaceTime. Held the phone for his mother. I'd thrown away letters I wrote to families because the grief piled faster than the mailboxes could take it. I was burned out. Hollow. Angry. And I thought maybe, if I talked about it, something would give." She looked down for a moment. Her hand clutched the envelope. But then I met her. The old woman. No one interrupted. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't give me a list of steps. She just looked at me like I wasn't disgusting for having survived. Like she understood something about how war doesn't always come with bombs. Sometimes, it comes with gloves and paperwork. Clarissa opened the letter. I never told anyone this, but she wrote me something before I left. She pressed it into my hand at the elevator. I didn't open it until I got home, but I've kept it with me ever since. Her voice shook as she read. "You will carry lives no one else remembers. You will ache in places no one can see. But that doesn't make you broken. It makes you a bearer of the sacred. And you're allowed to keep going." Clarissa folded the paper slowly. She reminded me that survival isn't shameful, and that sometimes carrying grief is the most generous thing we can do. The room was silent. A woman next to him held her breath. Clarissa sat down, her chest tight, but lighter than it had been in years. She didn't need applause. She just needed that. Later that night, as the retreat wound down, a young woman approached her outside by the fire pit. She looked barely 25. Big eyes, hollow cheeks, grief coiled tight around her spine. I'm sorry to bother you, she said. But do you still have the blog? The one about the woman? Clarissa smiled gently. Still here? The girl nodded. My mom used to read it before she died. She'd play the audio clips when we cooked dinner. Said it helped her feel less erased. Clarissa swallowed hard. She was right, she whispered. The girl looked down, then reached into her jacket and handed Clarissa a folded photograph. Old, grainy. It showed her mother, 15 years younger, laughing with none other than her. The woman from room 801. A refugee camp in Jordan. Two lives intersecting in a flash of dusty joy. I think she saved my mom's life once, the girl said. Clarissa held the photo like scripture. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. When she got back to her apartment in the city, Clarissa printed the photo and pinned it on her wall next to the letter. She opened her laptop and logged into the old blog again. It had been dormant for nearly 2 years. But something felt right now. She uploaded a new post. Title: Room 801 Revisited. Subtitle: Some stories never leave. Some are waiting for you to return. She typed slowly, carefully. Words full of grief, yes, but also reverence and gratitude. Then she hit publish. Almost instantly, the comments began, and the world whispered back.